Hello, welcome to the massive open online course on ICT skills in education. Today we are going to deal with Open Education Resources, OER. Open education resources are teaching and learning materials that are freely available online for everyone to use, whether you are an instructor, student, or self-learner. Examples of OER include full courses, course modules, syllabi, lectures, homework, assignments, quizzes, lab and classroom activities, pedagogical materials, games, simulations, and many more resources contained in digital media collections from around the world. Open educational resources are freely accessible, openly licensed to text, media, and other digital assets that are useful for teaching, learning, and assessing as well as for research purposes. There is no universal usage of open file formats in OER. The term OER describes publicly accessible materials and resources for any user to use, remix, improve, and redistribute under some licenses. The development and promotion of open educational resources is often motivated by a desire to provide an alternate or enhanced educational paradigm. The idea of open educational resources have numerous working definitions. The term was first coined at UNESCO's 2002 Forum on Open Courseware and designates teaching, learning, and research materials in any medium, digital or otherwise, that reside in the public domain or have been released under an open license that permits non-cost access, use, adaptation, and redistribution by others with no or other limited restrictions. Open licensing is built within the existing framework of intellectual property rights as defined by relevant international conventions and respects the authorship of the work. William and Flora Hewlett Foundation or Hewlett Foundation defines OER as open educational resources are teaching, learning, and research materials in any medium, digital or otherwise, that reside in the public domain or have been released under an open license that permits no cost access, use, adaptation, and redistribution by others with no or limited restrictions. The definition explicitly states that OER can include both digital and non-digital resources. Also, it lists several types of use that OER permit inspired by 5R activities of OER. 5R activities or permissions were proposed by David Wiley, which include retain the right to make, own, and control copies of the content. Example, download, duplicate, store, and manage. Reuse, the right to use the content in a wide range of ways. Example, in a class, in a study group, on a website, in a video. Revise, the right to adapt, adjust, modify, or alter the content itself. Example, translate the content into another language. Remix, the right to combine the original or revised content with other material to create something new. Example, incorporate the content into a mashup. Redistribute, the right to share copies of the original content, your revisions, or your remixes with others. Example, give a copy of the content to a friend. Users of OER are allowed to engage in any of these 5R activities permitted by the use of an open license. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) defines OER as digitalized materials offered freely and openly for educators, students and self-learners to use and reuse for teaching, learning and research. OER includes learning content, software tools to develop, use and distribute content, and implementation resources such as open licenses. By way of comparison, the Commonwealth of Learning has adopted the widest definition of OER as materials offered freely and openly to use and adapt for teaching, learning, development and research. The Wiki Educator project suggests that OER refers to educational resources, lesson plans, quizzes, syllabi, instructional modules, simulations, etc. that are freely available for use, reuse, adaptation and sharing. The above definitions expose some of the tensions that exist with OER. Nature of the resource. Several of the definitions above limit the definition of OER to digital resources, while others consider that any educational resource can be included in the definition. Source of the resource. While some of the definitions require a resource to be produced with an explicit educational aim in mind, others broaden this to include any resource which may potentially be used for learning. Level of openness. Most definitions require that a resource be placed in public domain or under a fully open license. Others require only that free use to be granted for educational purposes, possibly excluding commercial uses. These definitions also have common elements, namely they all cover use and reuse, repurposing and modification of the resources, include free use for educational purposes by teachers and learners, encompass all types of digital media. Given the diversity of users, creators and sponsors of open educational resources, it is not surprising to find a variety of use cases and requirements. For this reason, it may be as helpful to consider the differences between descriptions of open educational resources as it is to consider the descriptions themselves. One of the several tensions in reaching a consensus description of OER is whether there should be explicit emphasis placed on specific technologies. For example, a video can be openly licensed and freely used without being a streaming video. A book can be openly licensed and freely used without being an electronic document. This technologically driven tension is deeply bound up with the discourse of online open source licensing. There is also a tension between entities which find value in quantifying usage of OER and those which see such metrics as themselves being irrelevant to free and open resources. Those requiring metrics associated with OER are often those with economic investment in the technologies needed to access or provide electronic OER, those with economic interests potentially threatened by OER, or those requiring justification for the costs of implementing and maintaining the infrastructure or access to the freely available OER. While a semantic distinction can be made delineating the technologies used in access and host learning content from the content itself, these technologies are generally accepted as part of the collective of open educational resources. Since open educational resources are intended to be available for a variety of educational purposes, most organizations using OER neither award degrees nor provide academic or administrative support to students seeking college credits towards a diploma from a degree-granting accredited institution. In open education, there is an emerging effort by some accredited institutions to offer free certifications or achievement badges to document and acknowledge the accomplishments of participants. In order for educational resources to be OER, they must have an open license. Many educational resources made available on the internet are geared to allowing online access to digitalized educational content, but the materials themselves are restrictively licensed. Thus, they are not OER. Often, this is not intentional. Most educators are not familiar with copyright law in their own jurisdictions. International law and national laws of nearly all nations, and certainly of those who have signed on to the World Intellectual Property Organization (WIPO), restrict all content under strict copyright. The Creative Commons license is the most widely used licensing framework internationally used for OER. History of OER. The term learning object was coined in 1994 by Wayne Hodgins and quickly gained currency among educators and instructional designers, popularizing the idea that digital materials can be designed to allow easy reuse in a wide range of teaching and learning situations. The OER movement originated from developments in open and distance learning, ODL, and in the wider context of a culture of open knowledge, open source, free sharing and peer collaboration, which emerged in the late 20th century. OER and free libre open source software, FLOSS, for instance, have many aspects in common, a connection first established in 1998 by David Wiley, who coined the term open content and introduced the concept by analogy with open source. Richard Baranuik made the same connection independently in 1999 with the founding of OpenStax CNX. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology MIT OpenCourseware OCW project is credited for having sparked a global open educational resources movement after announcing in 2001 that it was going to put MIT's entire course catalog online and launching this project in 2002. In a first manifestation of this movement, MIT entered a partnership with Utah State University, where Assistant Professor of Instructional Technology David Wiley set up a distributed peer support network for the OCW's content through voluntary, self-organizing communities of interest. The term open educational resources was first adopted at UNESCO's 2002 Forum on the Impact of Open Courseware for Higher Education in Developing Countries. In 2005, OCD's Center for Educational Research and Innovation launched a 20-month study to analyze and map the scale and scope of initiatives regarding open educational resources in terms of their purpose, content and funding. The report, Giving Knowledge for Free, the emergence of open educational resources, published in May 2007, is the main output of the project, which involved a number of expert meetings in 2006. In September 2007, the Open Society Institute and the Shuttleworth Foundation convened a meeting in Cape Town to which 30 leading proponents of open education were invited to collaborate on the text of her manifesto. The Cape Town Open Education Declaration was released on 22 January 2008, urging governments and publishers to make publicly funded educational materials available at no charge via the internet. The global movement for OER culminated at the first World OER Congress convened in Paris on 22 June 2012 by UNESCO and other partners. The resulting Paris OER Declaration 2012 reaffirmed the shared commitment of international organizations, governments and institutions to promoting the open licensing and free sharing of publicly funded content, the development of national policies and strategies on OER, capacity building and open research. In 2018, the Second World OER Congress in Ljubljana, Slovenia was co-organized by UNESCO and the government of Slovenia. The 500 experts and national delegates from 111 countries adopted the Ljubljana OER Action Plan. It recommends 41 actions to mainstream open licensed resources to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Goal on quality and lifelong education. The objectives of the Second World OER Congress were to examine solutions to meet the challenges of mainstreaming OER content and practices into education systems worldwide, to showcase the world's best practices in OER policies, initiatives and experts, and to identify recommendations that are demonstrably best practices for the mainstreaming of OER. The Congress marks the 15th anniversary since the term OER was first coined at the UNESCO meeting and the 5th anniversary of the 2012 Paris OER Declaration that provided an internationally recognized strategy for OER actions. The Second World OER Congress brought together ministers of education and higher education, decision makers responsible for human resources development, senior policy makers, expert practitioners, researchers and relevant stakeholders. Some 500 participants attended the event from over 100 UNESCO member states, including ministers from Bangladesh, Barbados, Bulgaria, Costa Rica, Croatia, Kiribati, Lithuania, Malta, former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Mauritius, Mauritania, Slovenia, South Africa and the United Arab Emirates. The Second World OER Congress resulted in the Ljubljana OER Action Plan and the Second World OER Congress ministerial statement, which were both adopted by consensus. The Ljubljana OER Action Plan provides recommendations to stakeholders in 5 strategic areas, building the capacity of users to find, reuse, create and share OER, language and cultural issues, ensuring inclusive and equitable access to quality OER, developing sustainability models and developing supportive policy environments. The 2012 Paris OER Declaration was formally adopted at the 2012 World Open Educational Resources Congress held at the UNESCO headquarters in Paris from 20 to 22 June 2012. The declaration marks a historic movement in the growing movement for open educational resources and calls on governments worldwide to openly license publicly funded educational materials for public use. Another historical antecedent to consider is the pedagogy of artist Joseph Beuys and the founding of the Free International University for Creativity and Interdisciplinary Research in 1973. After co-creating with his students in 1967 the German Student Party, Beuys was dismissed from his teaching post in 1972 at the Staatliche Kunstakademie Düsseldorf, the Arts Academy of the city of Düsseldorf, Germany. The institution did not approve of the fact that he permitted 50 students who had been rejected from admission to study with him. The Free University became increasingly involved in political and radical actions calling for a revitalization and restructuring of educational systems. Open educational practices. Open educational practices (OER) have been used in educational context in a variety of ways, and researchers and practitioners have proposed different names for such practices. According to Wiley and Hilton 2018, the two popular terms used are open pedagogy and open educational practices. What these two terms refer to is closely related to each other, often indistinguishable. For example, Weller 2013 defines open pedagogy as follows. Open pedagogy makes use of this abundant open content such as open educational resources, videos, podcasts, but also places an emphasis on the network and the learner's connections within this. Open educational practices are defined as, for example, a set of activities around instructional design and implementation of events and processes intended to support learning. They also include the creation, use and repurposing of open educational resources (OER) and their adaptation to the contextual setting. Wiley and Hilton 2018 proposed a new term called OER-enabled pedagogy, which is defined as the set of teaching and learning practices that are only possible or practical in the context of the 5 R permissions, which are characteristic of OER, emphasizing the 5 R permissions enabled by the use of open licenses. Costs. One of the most frequently cited benefits of OER is their potential to reduce costs. While OER seem well placed to bring down total expenditures, they are not cost-free. New OER can be assembled or simply reused or repurposed from existing open resources. This is a primary strength of OER and as such can produce major cost savings. OER need not be created from scratch. On the other hand, there are some costs in the assembly and adaptation process. And some OER must be created and produced originally at some time. While OER must be hosted and disseminated, and some require funding, OER development can take different routes such as creation, adoption, and adaptation. Each of these models provide different cost structure and degree of cost efficiency. Upfront costs in developing the OER's infrastructure can be expensive, such as building the OER infrastructure. Butcher and Husen noted that a key argument put forward by those who have written about the potential benefits of OER relates to its potential for saving cost or at least creating significant economic efficiencies. However, to date, there has been limited presentation of concrete data to back up this assertion, which reduces the effectiveness of such arguments and opens the OER movement to justified academic criticism. Institutional support. A large part of the early work on open educational resources was funded by universities and foundations such as the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, which was the main financial supporter of open educational resources in the early years. The Shuttleworth Foundation, which focuses on projects concerning collaborative content creation, has contributed as well. With the British government contribution, institutional support has also been provided by the UK funding bodies. UNESCO is taking a leading role in making countries aware of the potential of OER. The organization has instigated debate on how to apply OERs in practice and chaired vivid discussions on this matter through its International Institute of Educational Planning (IIEP). Believing that OERs can widen access to quality education, particularly when shared by many countries and higher education institutions, UNESCO also champions OERs as a means of promoting access, equity and quality in the spirit of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Critical discourse about OER as a movement. The OER movement has been accused of insularity and failure to connect globally. OERs will not be able to help countries reach their educational goals unless awareness of their power and potential can rapidly be expanded beyond the communities of interest that they have already attracted. More fundamentally, doubts were cast on the altruistic motives typically claimed by OERs. The project itself was accused of imperialism because the economic, political and cultural preferences of highly developed countries determine the creation and dissemination of knowledge that can be used by less developed countries and may be a self-serving imposition. To counter the general dominance of OER from the developed countries, the Research on OER for Development (ROER 4D) research project aims to study how OER can be produced in the developing countries which can meet the local needs of the institutions and people. It seeks to understand in what ways and under what circumstances can the adoption of OER addresses the increasing demand for accessible, relevant, high quality and affordable post-secondary education in the Global South. Within the open educational resources movement, the concept of OER is active. Consider, for example, the conceptions of gratis versus libre knowledge as found in the discourses about massive open online courses MOOC, which may offer free courses but charge for end-of-course awards or course verification certificates from commercial entities. A second example of essentially contested ideas in OER can be found in the usage of different OER logos, which can be interpreted as indicating more or less allegiance to the notion of OER as a global movement. Stephen Downes has argued that from a connectivist perspective, the production of OER is ironic because in the final analysis, we can produce knowledge for people. The people who are benefiting from these open education resource initiatives are the people who are producing these resources. Let us now move on to summarize the session. OER are teaching and learning materials that are finally available online for everyone to use, whether you are an instructor, student or self-learner. Examples of OER include full courses, course modules, syllabi, lectures, homework assignments, quizzes, lab and classroom activities, pedagogical materials, games, simulations and many more resources contained in digital media collections from around the world. OER resources allow users to retain, reuse, revise, remix and redistribute. OER resources are free to access online, free to share, free to reuse and typically are shared under a Creative Commons license, allowing others to copy, distribute or revise the OERs for their own purposes. Thank you for watching this program. We shall meet in the next session. Goodbye.